Welcome back to the second module in the TEISS case study. Again, this is a case study that's different than your emissions inventory project that you're working on for your land. This is a case study that reviews most of what you'll need to know in TEISS and just adds one point source and one non-point source. And that's the homework for this module, and it's a really good review. So picking up on where we left off, we were on page 16, adding an emission unit, a process, which is extremely important, release point apportionment, which basically is how much of the emissions goes to different release points, and it may or may not be applicable to your sources, and the very important reporting period. Picking up where we left off, which was on page 16, the directions are to click on the emission unit item, which I think is supposed to look like a boiler and looks like 3 eggs frying. So opening up the TEISS View project we were working on, remember we were working on this facility, Rangeland Waste Facility. We had graphically defined the facility, and you can see there's also an emission release point also defined. However, this is the extent to which we can use the graphical user interface of the map to define a source in our project. We've defined the facility, we've gone in and defined the emission release point, and you can see that we have icons for facility, we have icon for the release point, which looks like a smokestack, and then the icons get into the point source, etc. So how do we get back to editing the information about this Rangeland Waste Facility point source? Well, there's 2 ways, remember? We could either go to input to access the linear data access screen, or we can right click the facility, and I need to make sure that I have the selection icon selected. So then I can click the facility and it says select all, and then or these other options, cancel, facility 1, Rangeland Waste Company, or are you really wanting to define something about the boundary of the emission inventory? Or are you looking for something in the surrounding area? We're interested in Rangeland Waste Company, so I can just click that, and that shows that it's selected when the area that is selected turns gray. Looks kind of like a chain link fence. So we're saying, yeah, we want to get into that chain link fence and edit some of that data. So we can say edit here, or again, we can go to the linear data entry window. I'm going to do this option, and because I accessed it using the map, it knows what facility I'm talking about, and instead of just opening up the linear data entry panel, it actually opens up information about this facility that I selected. So the stage that we were in, if you remember, wasn't editing the facility information, and you know that that panel is what we're editing because let's take a look at what we see in front of us. So I don't want to edit the information about the facility, so I'm going to click that red X to make sure I don't save anything if I accidentally typed into that panel. So taking a look at this linear data entry screen, also known as the input screen because that's what the icon that you click on to access it says. So one thing to notice is we've got this hierarchy, and what this hierarchy means is that you can't go in and define some process and not have already defined all these things on top of it. And that makes sense, especially like for example for a point source, you can't go in and say, well, I know I have this process on my land that's a boiler. Well, TEISS needs to know what facility that boiler is at, and specifically it needs to know all this information on top of it. So that's why there's this top to bottom hierarchy here, and then also over here are the breadcrumbs where you know where you are here and what exactly you're talking about. So we were looking at the Rangeland Waste Company. We had defined the release point. If you remember, there was a vertical stack, and now we're going to go into the emission unit and define that. So we click on emission unit, and it's blank. So what do we need to do to enter this? Well, now we're going to go back and look at the TEISS Case Project. So I can read here that this is a solid waste incinerator number 1 at this is this emission unit. So we're going to go back into TEISS, And under release point is emission units, and there isn't anything there now, so I'm going to click add, and it opens up the panel where I can enter information, and everything in the green boxes is mandatory. The yellow is optional, but I'm going to type in what it said, which was solid waste incinerator 1. And then I know I have to have a unit type code, so I can click here, and that just lets me see what's in the drop-down boxes. And it said it was 270, and I could see, oh yes, 270 incinerator. Great, that's the one I want. So I double click there, and then it fills in that information. And then the status, I can click in the drop-down box and double click on operating, and that fills that in. So now we've entered operating, and we see if there's anything else that's necessary for us to enter, anything else that's in green. There isn't. I do want to save this information, so I'm not going to click this X because that won't save it. I'm going to click this OK, and now we've defined an emission unit. In this case, we know that there is no unit control approach, which is a baghouse or something like that that would restrict the emissions. Unit control measure, an actual measure of how much that is restricted, that doesn't exist. This stuff just goes straight out the stack. So now we're in unit control pollutant. We know there's nothing for that. And finally, process. Okay, what is going on at this facility being emitted from this release point at this emission unit? What is the process? So I go back into my TEISS Case Project, the tutorial document, and I see there's a process identifier. Might as well leave it at 1. The source classification button 501-00102. What does that mean? Let's take a look at that in TEISS. So we need to add a process, so I'm going to click add, and that comes up with this panel, and we can leave the process identifier as 1. The process description, solid waste incinerator 1, is still there from the emission unit. Source classification code. Well, we know this is an incinerator and it's burning solid waste. So I clicked on this 3-dot search box because we know we have to enter the source classification code. And what we're looking for is this code beginning 501, we know. And you can see, obviously, it's waste disposal. All these codes, 5010000, are waste disposal, government waste disposal, and then there's a differentiation here. So we're going to look for that code that was given to us in the tutorial. Honestly, the easiest thing to do is, in the tutorial, select this code by double-clicking. I right-click, and I say copy, or you could do Control-C. Go back into TEISS view and then click in there and then do Control-V or right-click paste and then click the binoculars button, and it comes up with it, and it's solid waste disposal government, municipal incineration, a mass burn single chamber,